Hello, good evening. Welcome to the Alaska Weather Show. I'm meteorologist Carrie Hazley, and today is June 24th, 2020. On your screen, there are multiple ways that you can get a hold of us if you are seeking weather information. The first on the list there, the Alaska Weather Information Line. Give us a call at 1-800-472-0391. That takes you through a menu system where you can select the area that you are seeking weather information. You can always find us on the web at weather.gov/Alaska. You can also replace that word Alaska with the words Anchorage, Juneau, or Fairbanks. All of those sites take you to a homepage with a map on it where you can click on the map, and then it gives you the local forecast for the area you have selected. And as always, you can reach me anytime by email. My email address on the screen, carrie.hazley@noaa.gov. So we'll start off by taking a look at all of the different watches, warnings, and advisories across the state of Alaska today. The good news is most of the state is product free, where we take a look up on the Arctic coast, the west coast, south central, and the panhandle. No watches, warnings, advisories in effect. Everything going on is concentrated in the eastern part of the interior, and all of those products are for flooding. Now, we do have these areas highlighted in red, and most of that area is actually just covered by a flood watch, so it would be color coded in orange. But we have 5 distinct flood warnings for 5 different places within that area highlighted in red. So we just picked the worst condition across the area. So why don't I start by going through all of the different flood products that are out there. There are several. So the first one is going to be a flood warning for the Tanana River, and this one is for the Tanana River in Nenana, valid until just after noon on Thursday, and this one's been in effect now for a couple of days. We are expecting low-lying areas along the Tanana River in Nenana to continue flooding with the high water there, and we should see high water through the week. Now, the Tanana River is also impacting the Fairbanks area with high water. We have a flood warning now in effect until 9 a.m. on Friday morning for the Tanana River in Fairbanks, where we continue to see rising water levels and minor flooding. We do expect the Tanana River to peak sometime on Thursday, but we will see elevated water along the Tanana through the weekend. Now, other products that are in effect, we have flood warning in effect for the Chena River, and this one valid in effect until very early Friday morning, 2 a.m. on Friday morning. And this one is to the Nordale Road Bridge, and we're expected to see the Chena River there exceed flood stage, and right now we're seeing minor flooding at the Rosehip campgrounds and also the Chena River Recreation Area, Steamboat Landing. We're looking for that to continue through at least Thursday night, and then again we see that warning drop off early Friday morning. Other products in effect for flooding, we have a flood warning in effect for the Salcha River near Salcha. This one is valid until 8:30 at night tomorrow. We've seen moderate to heavy rain continuing there for the last couple of days, and we are expecting that river to crest sometime this afternoon or this evening, and then water slowly receding, but continued high water there is likely. And that high water there likely to inundate the state campgrounds near the Richardson Highway and maybe the subdivision below it there. And lastly, we also have a flood warning in effect that remains in effect through tomorrow evening for the Goodpester River near Delta. And with that one, we're expecting river levels to remain high through the week, and all areas along the Goodpester River are expected to flood. So if you're along that river or any of the other rivers, it's a good idea to move to higher ground and make sure that you're maintaining awareness of what's going on as far as all of our products. Again, you can get those on the web, weather.gov/Alaska, for the latest information. Do you have a picture you want to share? You can send that to us on the web. If you go to weather.gov/Alaska, you can get to the TV page. There's an email address there. Or again, send that right to me at carrie.hazley@noaa.gov, and I'll make sure to get that to the right person so that we can see what you're seeing in your area, and we may even have to update a product based on that. We appreciate all of the photos that you guys have already sent in. Now, switching gears here, fire danger. So we go from high water to fire. For the most part, fire danger is pretty low across the state because we've been in such a wet pattern now for the last couple of days. So not so good news for the rivers, but it is good news for the fires. The places with the greatest likelihood for us to see any new fire starts are highlighted here in orange. The upper Yukon Valley there along the river, where we've continued to see some of the warmest conditions in the state, and also some thunderstorms is the place where we see the greatest likelihood over the next 24 hours for any new fires to start. Could see some lightning strikes triggering maybe a new fire, a small fire in the Copper River Valley, and then over just to the west of the Alaska Range and then down around the Bristol Bay area. There's some possibility, again, that probability is fairly low, and these would just be strikes attributed mostly to lightning. So as far as the weather goes, we continue to see this wet pattern persisting. So we are getting lightning popping up during the day. We're also seeing widespread showers. So as far as the satellite picture goes, cloud cover over much of the state, particularly across the western part of the interior, and then also the eastern interior with the pop-up showers. We see clouds associated with an area of low pressure working their way up from the North Pacific, pushing their way into the Gulf of Alaska, and we're really going to start to see the Panhandle area impacted by all of this as we get into the day tomorrow. So quick look at what happened today. It's been a very wet pattern across a lot of mainland Alaska and pretty widespread cloud cover. The sun keeps trying to peek in my window and it just won't stay out. I bet that's the case where you are too. We haven't seen a lot of places with considerable sunshine today, although we are getting a few pop-up thunderstorms and a few scattered showers across places. But the real weather maker is really going to be that low pressure system that's at the bottom part of your screen there. That system is a 995 millibar low pressure system. It's going to work its way into the Gulf of Alaska through the overnight hours and into Thursday, bringing more rain to places that are already really wet. High pressure has been dominating the weather up over the Arctic, and with that high pressure, we're seeing some fog along the coast. We're actually seeing some much cooler than normal temperatures, and so with that, we're actually seeing some places where snow is a possibility. So maybe a few flurries along the Arctic coast tonight. Most of those would be more in the offshore area, but definitely something to watch if you're north of the Brooks Range or even in the Brooks Range at the higher elevations. Some snow certainly a possibility through the overnight hours. So tonight that area of low pressure does work its way closer to mainland Alaska. So we continue to see rain really spreading its way into places that have been experiencing more in the way of just pop-up showers and then really reaching coastal areas by the time we get into the morning time frame tomorrow. For the day on Thursday then, we continue to see low pressure dominating over mainland Alaska, showers and again some pop-up thunderstorms likely, mostly cloudy skies however in most places, which is going to help to kind of keep temperatures down. And on the west side of that cold front that you see across the state, continued really cool for this time of year temperatures. So that one's going to definitely continue. That frontal system does make its way toward the Panhandle tomorrow. Rain, gusty winds, particularly in the Haines area tomorrow. We are looking for some significantly gusty winds in Haines, also in the coastal Ratters in the northern part of the Panhandle in the vicinity of Haines and Skagway. And then as we get into the day on Friday, that system, it's rapidly moving, so it mostly dissipates by Friday over the Panhandle, although showers linger behind it. And then we see another trough of low pressure that'll push its way in Friday, and we'll continue to see some showers going through the overnight hours to start off the weekend. Over mainland Alaska, we also see that cold front start to slowly dissipate. Showers are going to linger, but the real story is going to be this area of low pressure that's working its way across the Arctic and into the west coast, spreading precipitation and gusty winds by the time we get into Friday. So a bit of a pattern change from what we've been seeing there. Now let's take a look at temperatures to start off Thursday morning. We continue to see some temperatures getting below freezing up along the Arctic coast or hovering right at freezing along the Arctic coast. And then down around the Kotzebue Sound area, we are going to see some temperatures get below freezing tomorrow morning as well. Just barely below though, and Kotzebue you should stay up to at about 36, AKwx 31 to start off tomorrow morning. Coming into the interior of Fort Yukon tomorrow morning, 49, down towards McGrath, 49 there as well, and then Bethel and places out in the YK Delta there, 43 degrees, right around 36 out on the coast there for Hooper Bay and then some of the other coastal villages there. South Central Alaska, temperatures dipping down into the mid-40s overnight. Same is going to be true for the Aleutians and the Panhandle. Now into tomorrow, the warmest conditions are going to be across the eastern part of the interior, and that's where we continue to see those thunderstorms pop up, but we are seeing a good amount of rain with the showers we're getting. And 36, 68, that's a much better number for this time of year for Fort Yukon, moving down towards Tanana, 61, 65 for McGrath. Up along the Arctic though, temperatures staying in the low to mid 30s for most of the day, 36 at UAFTV, and then over around towards the Wales area, 38 there, 40 on St. Lawrence Island, and Bethel topping out only at 50 tomorrow, upper 50s to low 60s across South Central, and then 50s with that system impacting the Panhandle. For Friday morning, we do see continued cool temperatures and actually a bit of that cool air pushing a bit further south down into the YK Delta by the time we get into Friday morning, with Bethel bottoming out at about 40 degrees, 38 for Nome, 34 up in AKwx, 36 for Dead Horse, 49 there in the Fort Yukon area, and then warming up a bit for the day on Friday, but still well below normal.
And now, Aviation weather around Alaska.
And moving on to aviation weather now, let's start by taking a look at flight categories for the Thursday morning, where we do see widespread IFR conditions across the mountainous areas and also coastal areas in mainland Alaska. Also some IFR conditions to start off Thursday morning in the far western part of the Aleutians, also parts of the Alaska Peninsula and in the northern part of the Panhandle. Looking up to the north, some IFR conditions in the northwest part of the Arctic coast, where we will see some scattered snow showers to start off the morning. Also, the potential for some snow showers throughout the Brooks Range tomorrow morning, so most of the areas are going to start out marginal VFR. Though some of the higher terrain will see some IFR conditions to kick off the day, as well as some marginal VFR conditions with precipitation across the western part of the interior. Now going into Thursday afternoon, we do see some improvement across a lot of mainland Alaska, but we will see some thunderstorms develop, particularly in the Yukon and Tanana valleys, where those lightning strikes and also some of those clouds could produce some heavy showers at times. We will see the marginal VFR linger up along the Arctic and then out over the Bering and the Aleutians, and then we see an area of IFR continue to push its way towards the Panhandle, that associated with a new weather system moving in there. So by the time we get to Friday morning, the Panhandle, all IFR conditions with rain up there. Also some IFR hugging the coast up in the Arctic and IFR in the far western Aleutians. But by and large, the Friday morning looks better than Thursday morning, where most of mainland Alaska will be prevailing VFR, with just some patchy spots over the terrain with some lower conditions, and then most of the marginal VFR offshore. And then by Friday afternoon, mostly VFR conditions across mainland, again with thunderstorms popping up, and any IFR that's out there is really going to be pretty isolated and concentrated along terrain areas. Now, as far as passes go, Anaktuvik will start off the morning tomorrow at marginal VFR. They'll stay there as they go through the day. Adigan starting off at IFR, improving to marginal VFR by afternoon hours. Down to the Alaska Range, Lake Clark and Merrill both going to start the day at IFR conditions. Lake Clark will recover to VFR, Merrill recovering to marginal VFR, and then for rainy, IFR becoming marginal VFR as well. Over to Windy Pass, you'll start the day off at IFR, recovering to VFR, and same is going to be true over at Isabel Pass. For Metasta Pass, we do look for VFR conditions all day on Thursday. Tanita Pass starting the day at marginal, improving to VFR conditions. And then over to Portage, IFR conditions recovering to marginal VFR conditions by the afternoon hours. And finally over the Panhandle, Chilkoot and White, IFR conditions all day at both passes. Now on to freezing levels. The surface freezing level is up along the Arctic coast, and we do see a pretty good dip of cold air out along the western part of the state through the Bering Strait there. Freezing levels right around 2,000 feet through the Bering Strait, even a bit below that. Across mainland Alaska, freezing levels primarily between 4,000 and 6,000 feet, a bit higher when you get closer to the Alcan border. Down over the Panhandle, freezing levels ranging from 4,000 feet in the north to 8,000 feet in the south. As far as icing goes for the day on Thursday, outside of thunderstorms, we do have two areas where we are expecting at least some considerable moderate turbulence. Considerable moderate icing. Both areas highlighted there in orange. The first is along that frontal boundary in the western part of the interior, heights on that above 7,000 feet for the moderate, and then down over the coastal areas along the Gulf of Alaska there. We're also looking for some moderate icing. For the day on Thursday above 7,000 feet, and then a widespread area with clouds where we could see at least some isolated moderate reports. And now for the winds, the main jet is well south of Alaska, where we do see a jet out in the North Pacific peaking out at about 130 knots, then pushing its way from the southwest to northeast across the Panhandle. There's also a weaker jet up over the Arctic and another over our Russian airspace. Moving down to 9,000 feet, we do see fairly strong winds in the offshore areas along the Gulf Coast there, where winds peak out at about 25 knots, and then also a weak jet at 9,000 feet from the central part of the interior stretching up into the Arctic, where winds peak out at about 35 knots up around Utqiagvik. Stepping down to 3,000 feet, light winds at flight level all across mainland Alaska, with the strongest winds primarily offshore from Kodiak Island over towards the Panhandle, where we do see a place offshore peaking out at 40 knots. As far as turbulence and what that translates into, outside of thunderstorms, that is a pretty weak turbulence pattern across the frontal boundary there in the western part of the interior. Some isolated moderate turbulence below 4,000 feet, and then also some isolated moderate turbulence stretching from Kodiak Island up towards the Gulf Coast and then down around to the Panhandle below 4,000 feet. But again, a pretty quiet pattern wind-wise up the upper levels, so should be pretty good flying weather wind-wise. It's really going to be the flight categories and the precipitation that are going to limit folks, not really the wind and the turbulence. So we'll be back after the break with your marine weather.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of Alaska Weather Facts. I'm meteorologist Dave Snider, and joining us today is Eric Stevens from GINA, the Geographic Information Network of Alaska at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. Thank you for joining us, Eric.
My pleasure, Dave.
Thank you. And you're joining us here to talk a little bit more about satellites and how satellites work, and especially one neat feature that's working over Alaska right now. What is that?
Well, there's a lot of weather satellites and a lot of instruments on these satellites, and there are new generations going up and new instruments. This includes something called the day-night band, which is not a cover band at the local bar, but it's a new satellite that is very useful, especially here in Alaska, especially in the winter.
In the wintertime, yeah, that makes it a little bit hard to use some of the normal tools that we associate with weather satellite imagery.
Right. You know, one of the classic weather satellite instruments is just visible light. What would the human eye see if you were riding on a weather satellite yourself and looked down and it was black and white? You'd see the clouds reflecting the sunlight. And we've got an example from the Pacific Ocean. There's a geostationary satellite, and we can see that the eastern side of the image is in daylight. The western side, it's night over there, so you don't see anything because there's no sunlight over there. And visible imagery, it's very intuitive. You see the clouds just like you see them standing on the ground, but now you're a satellite seeing them from above. But the problem is, what about the night side of the planet? How do you track the storms? How do you know where the rain is, the snow, the weather, if you can't see the clouds? And that's why, just like a television can change from one channel to another, or a radio can change stations, satellites can change the frequency of the electromagnetic spectrum that they're looking at. We can go to infrared instead of visible light. You know, it's heat energy. You can see heat, and we've got another satellite picture from the same time, same satellite, out over the Pacific Ocean. That's the infrared side, and we're seeing temperature there. And even at night, when there's no light, everything still has a temperature.
So we're sensing something with a thermometer instead of perhaps the visible side of that, is what you're saying?
That's right. On this depiction, colder features are lighter shades, warmer features are dark. And so clouds tend to be colder than the ground. Clouds are higher in the atmosphere, it's cooler. And so that very same image on the western or the left-hand side of the globe, now we can see the clouds there, even though it's nighttime, because we're seeing the temperatures. And one nice feature is that tropical storm there, just in the middle of the northern hemisphere there, hurricane or typhoon, depending on...
That's that swirly part that we see in the middle of the image?
There you go. You can even see the eye on it there, especially in the infrared image. So we've got two kinds of imagery there from the same satellite, different instruments, you know, different channels like on a television, visible and infrared. You know, it turns out there's no one magic tool. Each has its strengths, each has its flaws, weaknesses. The visible is nice, it's intuitive, it's easy to understand, but doesn't work at night. Infrared is nice, it works at night, you can see temperatures, but there is a catch. What if your clouds and the nearby bare ground or open water, what if those were about the same temperature?
Oh, that's going to be hard to figure out what's going on.
If you can only see temperature and you have two features that are the same temperature, they will look the same. You won't be able to tell. They're camouflaged. This happens, especially, it can happen around Alaska, especially over the ocean when you have low clouds that are the same temperature as the open water.
That happens quite a bit in Alaska.
We have an example. Now, this is from a different geostationary satellite. It's down over the Atlantic Ocean. Look in the South Atlantic. In infrared, we've highlighted in a yellow circle there. There's some patches of clouds, but it looks like there's a clear area in the middle of that image. That's the infrared look. But let's take a look at the visible channel, and we can see there's a stripe of clouds across the middle of that circle that is only visible in the visible. The trick here is that those are low clouds of about the same temperature as the surrounding ocean. So from an infrared point of view, where you're seeing temperature, the clouds in the water nearby are the same temperature, they look the same. It's only on the visible that you can see what stands out as the actual imagery. Two tools, each have their strengths and weaknesses. Can we combine them? That's where the day-night band comes in. It's a super sensitive visible sensor that can actually see by moonlight. It can even see the aurora. And in Alaska, we have long winter nights. We can use that day-night band. Here's an example from that storm that blew the Kullik drilling platform ashore near Kodiak Island in December back in 2012. This image is right near when that storm happened, and it's in the middle of the night in December.
But this looks like visible imagery.
Looks like daytime imagery. It's amazing. That sensor can take any little bit of moonlight and just make the most of it. And we can see so much detail. Even in the northern part of the image there, you can see some aurora up there. The northern lights.
That's that band that goes across the Arctic slope?
You got it. That's the northern lights. We're seeing black and white image here, so you don't get the green or the purple colors there. But that is the aurora. There's another example of the day-night band, and this is from January of 2013. It's about 4 in the morning, and this is a snapshot from Weather Service software. And we can even see in the middle of the image, there's the lights of Fairbanks and North Pole over to Eielson Air Force Base. Anchorage and Matsu lights, city lights, are evident as well. We can see, even though it's 4 in the morning in January, there is no sunlight to be had, that just enough moonlight is available that this sensor can see that. So we're trying to solve that puzzle where visible light is good, but only during the daytime. IR is good at night, but you can't see the difference between clouds and ground sometime. The day-night band is an attempt to do the best of both with one tool. And it's brand new for Alaska here, and we're hoping to use it in the forecast process and help predict storms, weather patterns, to help get good forecast for people.
Okay, another tool in the weather toolkit for meteorologists in Alaska and researchers worldwide. Thank you so much, Eric, for joining us today. And you can learn more about Dehne and the day-night band by going to the web address that you see on your screen. For Alaska Weather Facts, I'm meteorologist Dave Snider.
And now, marine weather around Alaska.
All right, welcome back. Now let's start by taking a look at the sea ice edge. Here's the most recent analysis, and we're focusing primarily up on the Arctic as most of the ice now has receded back that way. There is one area of ice, though, stretching from Wales to Shishmaref and then out into parts of Kotzebue Sound. We are expecting anything that's left in that particular area to be gone within the next day or two, leaving all of that to open water. Turning the focus then to the Arctic, where most of the ice is, the melt pattern for this year, very typical, where we do see some lower concentrations just off the Cape Lisburne and Point Hope area, and then over towards Prudhoe Bay and Kaktovik. We are seeing more in the way of ice hanging on to the shore. However, there is an area of open water there around Kaktovik over towards Prudhoe Bay. And in the next couple of days, pretty much the next 24 hours, because of the wind pattern being primarily out of the east, we look for that area of lower concentration ice to expand just a little bit westward. And then as we get into the weekend, things calm down a bit, and we're not looking for any other significant changes up along the Arctic coast as far as ice goes. Now, as far as marine weather conditions go, let's take a look down over the Panhandle first, where winds are primarily out of the south and fairly strong in the offshore waters, ranging between 25 and 35 knots, with seas up to about 10 feet as a frontal boundary is approaching. In the interior waters, those southerly winds are primarily up to about 15 knots, out of the southern Panhandle 25 knots, and seas 3 to 4 feet. Calming down tomorrow and wind shifting direction out along the west, or out along the coast there, where we will look for winds to shift to be more northwesterly and then more of a southerly push, still staying in the interior waters. Winds dropping down a bit to about 15 knots and then 10 knots in the interior waters, seas decreasing as well. Now for Thursday, over the Cook Inlet area, the northern part of the Gulf, we are going to see some fairly strong winds and waves out over the Gulf area as a frontal boundary pushes its way in. So winds ranging between 25 and 30 knots, primarily out of the east, with seas up to about 10 feet. Over Cook Inlet, winds out of the northeast up to about 15 knots and seas between 4 and 3 feet. And then pretty calm over the Prince William Sound area. Again, winds out of the northeast to 15, with seas up to 2 feet. Now for the Friday conditions on the Cook Inlet area there, we are going to look for the winds to shift directions and pick up a little bit Friday across Cook Inlet. So they'll range from 15 knots in the north to 25 knots in the south. Seas picking up a little bit in southern Cook Inlet as well, up to about 7 feet. Conditions moderating a bit over the northern part of the Gulf, although still fairly strong, with winds 15 to 25 knots and seas 8 to 9 feet. Now moving further west, we take a look at the area around the Alaska Peninsula, where the worst conditions are going to be in the vicinity of Kodiak Island on Thursday, with winds out of the northeast up to about 25 knots and 10 feet on the Pacific side through Shelikof Strait northeast, with seas up to about 7 feet there. And then over in the Bristol Bay area, fairly calm southerly winds, 10 knots with 2 feet seas. When we get into the day on Friday, things on the Kodiak Island side start to moderate just a little bit, especially with the seas calming down a bit. Winds shifting to be out of the west between 20 and 25 knots. Bristol Bay winds picking up there out of the west 20 knots with seas up to about 4 feet. Further out the Aleutians on Thursday, we're going to look for seas to range between 10 and 15. We'll look for winds to range between 10 and 15 knots. Bit variable in direction, but mostly out of the northwest, and then seas 4 to 5 feet in most places, a few places up to about 6 feet. Not much change as we get into the day on Friday. Some increase in the winds, but seas stay about the same. So we see winds kind of variable in direction, a bit of a southeasterly push in the central part of the Aleutians, winds 20 to 25 knots. Further up the west coast now, we see for Thursday winds primarily out of the north with that cold push coming down through the Bering Strait. And we're going to look for winds to range between 10 and 20 knots. Seas in the range of about 3 to 4 feet most places. Into the day on Friday, though, the winds shift directions quite a bit as that area of low pressure that's over the Russian area is going to work its way towards the west coast slowly. So we see winds shifting to have more of a southerly component to them and picking up a good bit, 20 to 30 knots in most places, and then seas up to about 11 feet just south of St. Lawrence Island. Up over the Arctic, we're not really dealing with seas just yet as ice is dominating the weather most places, but Thursday we do have those good easterly winds, 15 to 20 knots. That's going to keep that open water area around Kaktovik working its way towards the Prudhoe Bay area. And then when we get into the day on Friday up over the Arctic, we are going to see some more in the way of stronger waves through the Bering Strait area up to about 11 feet and some pretty gusty winds between 10 and 20 knots there. And then finally, to recap the weather for tonight, low pressure dominating the weather across most of mainland Alaska. That's going to continue until tomorrow morning, where we will see widespread shower activity and a few pop-up thunderstorms, and then rainy conditions down over a lot of the Panhandle. Have a good evening.
These forecasts are for planning purposes only. Call 1-800-WX-BRIEF for a formal pre-flight briefing. Always file a flight plan before you go flying. The U.S. Coast Guard Auxiliary urges you to leave a float plan with a friend or the harbor master before you go boating.